in fact, the route that the United States is going to follow over the next few weeks.
The other kind of speculation in all this is that someone did not want a summit to occur in the first place.
Possible.
And the question is asked, it's been said, for example, that now the military posture of the United States is in pretty good shape. As I've said previously, we're economically in better shape than the Soviets are. And so therefore, as Reagan comes to the end of his term, this would be the crowning achievement of his term. How much pressure is there upon the administration to have a summit? Or do you think the politics of this really is a higher kind of priority?
Well, there are the theories, of course, that neither side wants a summit, or one side or the other. And the United States doesn't want it, or some persons within the United States don't want it, and the Soviet or the Soviet Union doesn't want it, and or some persons within the Soviet administration don't want it. And so this situation has been fabricated to try and prevent it. It's clearly we've agreed, or at least I've suggested, that maybe it will prevent it. There are clearly hardliners in both the Reagan administration and in, if I may use the phrase, the Gorbachev administration, who do not want the summit for one reason or another. The military and both sides may not. Clearly there's not much agreement in the United States as to, within the administration, as to the arms position. So it's possible that is a situation. A third, and in my judgment, fairly likely possibility is that somebody just blew it. Somebody in the FBI may have said, okay, let's get this guy. And it wasn't cleared up. Somebody in the FBI said, let's get this guy, and didn't stop to think that we're at the foothills of the summit, if I may use that phrase. And so it was done as a mistake. And it could be that the same situation happened in the Soviet Union. I'm tempted to think it's less likely in the Soviet Union to be just an outright mistake than it might be here, because I know less about the Soviet bureaucracy than I do about the American bureaucracy. Those things are all possible, no question about it.
How important is it, the timing now that we have a summit, that the president have a summit, as John suggested, perhaps as the crowning jewel, and as President Reagan prepares to leave office, it's important to him politically, so that when history books are written, that Ronald Reagan also has some accord with the Soviets to show. How important is it now, or should it just be that we wait for this to blow over some, much as we wait for other things to blow over when we have problems with the Soviet Union, and have the summit later?
It's very difficult to say, but one theory that's been expressed is that for a long time, the United States and the Soviet Union have been out of phase with regard to their need or desire for disarmament or arms control. When we wanted it, they didn't. When they wanted it, we didn't. And so for a long time, there's been that sort of out of phase characteristic of our negotiation. One has gotten the impression over the last few months, maybe even over the last year, that we might be entering a common phase for the first time in a long time. That maybe now both sides are feeling, yeah, now's the time for some serious negotiation and some discussion. And there is certainly reason to believe there's a widespread common interest between Gorbachev and Reagan with regard to some kind of arms control deal. Maybe slightly different reasons, but nonetheless there is a commonality of interest to have it. Now, if this incident blows it out of the water, then it may be too bad. And clearly, if it goes beyond 6 to 8 months, then we're going to have a problem with towards the end of the Reagan administration's term.
Well, then perhaps that's part of the plan, that the Soviets would just as soon not deal with someone like Reagan, who they see as a hardliner, and might want to wait for the roll of the dice with the '88 election. That's
possible. That's one possibility, and perfectly respectable one. But if it is, it's too bad.
If I can go back to Mel's point, I think it's very important that those people who control the bureaucracy in the Soviet Union maintain that control, and that's the paramount thing that they have in mind at this time. They're not going to give up power until they're forced to give up power, and I cannot see how there are going to be forces within the Soviet Union to force them to give up power and to change their behavior.
The pressure will come from outside, I think. There's one other aspect that I see developing from a public relations standpoint, and really we have what sociologists call a developing world code of ethics. and it's really affecting how we feel as a global social system in terms of behavior patterns. And we have certain ethical codes developing that we can see in relation to discrimination. In other words, certainly South Africa is feeling the impact of that on its social system or government. And so that same kind of force is going to be placed on other governments as well. And here again, how they respond will depend on how strong they are and how much they can control the system that they have. And here again, I come back to the question of the communications technology and what will occur there in breaking down these barriers.
Well, Mel, Peter Drucker in his book talks about this sea change where countries like Mexico, Brazil, Korea, and all these countries have so much influence in the world, but I don't see these countries going towards democracy. So I don't see them giving into these lofty concepts of rights of others, and I guess that doesn't sound very optimistic, does it? But do you see a more optimistic look in terms of how people respond to abuses?
I certainly see a lot of struggle, but I do see movement. In other words, I think the movement within Poland is a good example of the demand for greater freedom of the speech and greater freedom of the people within the country. I think what we've seen in the Philippines is a movement in this direction. I think we're all very much you might say, captives of the cultural development that we've gone through. And it has taken us years to get away from the feudal system concepts of having a power elite in control. And when you look at the development of South America and how those governments evolved, you see that they are still very much tied to cultural conditioning in terms of how they view things. But here again, it will be what happens and what occurs in terms of world communication as to whether these concepts are broken down.
And isn't technology a critical factor in that?
Very critical.
I would have thought it's going to be increasingly difficult, surely, maybe I'm wrong, but I would think it'd be increasingly difficult to control the technology and therefore the access.
And I know, I think countries are already worrying about this, and I get some response from some of my international students from the Middle East where they are making assumptions that their countries will be able to control communications, and I don't think that's going to be the case. But then perhaps I'm overly optimistic as to what the technology is going to be able to do.
We're out of time today. Thanks to our panelists, Tom Sargent, Mel Sharp, and John Rouse. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for being with us.
If you have comments regarding this program, please address them to John Rouse, Box 149, Muncie, Indiana 47305. The producer for Public Affairs Roundtable is John Rouse. Associate producers are Cecil Bohannon and Bill Mosier. This program is a production of University Media Services, the Department of Political Science, and radio and television stations on the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana.